Okay, so we are going to proceed to the last part of the problem solving process, which is the steps in problem solving. So the step in problem solving, we need to know that we are going to solve the problem in formal or formal. So informal is intuitive way without specifically considering the steps outlined. So this is informal, and the formal one, we are using the logical, sequential order in stating, define or analyze the problem and then to solve it. Okay, so now we are going to proceed. What are the steps for the problem solving? Okay, so there are there are 8 steps in problem solving. So the first 4 part is we are stating the problem, and another 4 step we are solving the problem. So in the first part, which is state the problem, so we have 4 steps. Step number 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so step number 1, we recognize the problem. Step number 2, we define the problem. Step number 3, we collect relevant information about the problem. And then step number 4 is we analyze the relevant information. Okay, so this is the first part, we state the problem. And then the second part, we are going to solve the problem in step number 5. We develop alternate solution to the problem. And then step number 6, we choose the best solution. Step number 7, we implement the solution. And lastly, we evaluate the result. So after this, we are going to learn in detail what what involved in each step of the problem solving. Okay, so in step 1, recognizing the problem. So the symptoms are not problems. Symptoms are signs indicating that a problem may exist. That's step number 1. So in step number 2, in deciding the problem, we are deciding what the main issues of the problems are, and then clarifying the differences between the major goals and the actual operating result. Okay, so these are the steps that related to the office management. So the next part is we use the relevant information that is important. Step number 3, we are collecting relevant information. So this is W. Okay, W starting for what is the real problem. So what are the elements and what are the symptoms, and then where did the problem occur, why there. Okay, and then when it occurred, why at this time. And next is age, how it occurred, why this way. And the next one is to whom it occurred, why him or why her. And lastly, who make final decisions to solve the problem. Okay, and in step number 4, we analyze relevant information. So in this step number 4, we examine each element and its relationship to the other elements and to the whole problem. Number 2, we are going to discover interrelationships and patterns in the work operations. And the third one, we are going to compare the problem with other situations. And lastly, you are going to sort, sequence and order the problem. Okay, step number 5. In step number 5, we are develop alternate solutions. So starting from step number 5, we are going to solve the problem. So we develop a set of hypotheses. So decision tree in figure 6.3, use the chart to alternate courses of action for solving the problem and probable consequences. Okay, and step number 6, we are going to choose the best solution, or in other words, we are going to make the decision. Okay, so what are the reasons for choosing the best solution, okay, or to making the decision? The first one is it takes less time, will be more effective, will be preferred by employees as well as management, will result in greater productivity, intuition says it's the best, and lastly, will help to reduce the operating costs. And step number 7, after we have made the decision, we are going to implement our solution. Okay, so by putting the selected solution to work, and then by the time we reach this stage, all the reorganizing and other necessary work have been completed. Okay, this is step number 7. So these are the steps in problem solving that related to the office situation. Okay, and lastly, evaluate the result after we have conducted the solution, the best solution. Okay, and then we implement the solution. So now we are going to the last part. We evaluate the result of the solution that we have implemented. Okay, so 2 factors we are going to evaluate. The first one is quantity, how much is produced, and the second one is the quality, how satisfactory or convenient of the solution that we have implemented. Okay, so for evaluating the result, it will involve the self-criticism of group's solution, reviewing present work processes for future improvements, and lastly, we rating how well solution remove or decrease a seriousness of a problem. And then we're going to proceed to the last part in chapter 4, which is the barriers in solving office problem. Okay, therefore, as administrative office manager, you are not the problem solver. You are also going to face the barriers in solving this problem. Okay, so now let's go in detail what are the problems and barriers that administrative office manager are going to face. Okay, so for this one is example of the barriers. Okay, so there are 3 types of a problem or barriers. The first one is the human itself. Number 2 is the system, and lastly is the economic. So what are the barriers actually? So for the human, the barriers is very subjective, intangible, emotional, human nature. And for system, the barrier that the AOM are going to face is the inability to achieve higher level of productivity. And in economic, the barrier is the poor use of available fund and resources. Okay, so now we are going to know what are the example of the barriers for these 3 types. So for human, example of barriers are misperception, and then the negative attitudes of the human itself, the attitudes of the personnel, and lastly is the interpersonal conflict between the human. Okay, especially in office. And then for system, the example of barriers are, the first one is the poor working conditions. For example, do not have a very enough lighting, and then maybe the condition, you are not what we call very cozy to work, it's quite hot. Okay, and then your workstation is not very what we call the what we call the arrangement of your workstation. Okay, it's not well prepared. Okay, next one is the weak procedures of the system. Okay, and lastly is indicate training. For example, you are having your organization are using the new system, but when your employees do not have an inadequate training, so the what we call the employees are failed to use the system. Okay. So, last one is economic. So, what are the example of barriers for economic? Okay, the first one is poor use of time by office worker. Okay, so supposed to be your working hours is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. But sometimes when you come to the office, you have your break for 1 hour, and for example like 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Okay, so that's an example of poor use of time by office worker. And then theft of company properties, and lastly is failure to develop a sense of cost cutting. For or in other words, you are not use what we call wisely use the resource of your company. Okay, so this one is referring to the Collars and Keeling, page 70 and 72. So after this, we are going to learn in detail what are the actual type of problem in human, system and economy. Okay. So for the human problems, okay, it relates to the attitudes and biases, ethical concept. You do not have the same concept, and the value systems, motivation and interest in the job, fear of losing job or respect, and lack of personal skill. So advances in IT, information technology, creates many forms of a special human problem. Okay, and then another trait is you have a limited memory, can process limited information simultaneously. You are not multitasking. Okay, and then you are limited computational abilities, influences by organizational environment, and lastly, you usually work under stress. Okay, so therefore, when you have a human problem, there's a need for you as administrative office manager to make sure that you design satisfying jobs, you protect the privacy of employee information, you ensure the jobs will continue, you provide retraining. For example, you have a new system, you give another training for your employee to use a new system introduced in your company. And lastly is you resolve power struggles among leaders in OA. Okay, organizational administrative. Okay, so the next one. Okay, so in human problems, we as administrative office manager, you are going to have a difficulty in dealing with this problem. The first one is because our subjective, the first one, because intangible, and also it involves the emotional nature. So these are the first difficulty. The second difficulty, because of the basic qualification for solving human problems. So it requires the trust, the fair-mindedness, patience, good judgment, and also the common sense. Okay, so we are going to proceed to the second type of the barriers in solving office problem, which is the system problem. So systems set to accomplish assigned work. So the problems are more objective and measurable than the human problems. For example, expensive machines, machine breakdowns, and poor working conditions. So these are examples that related to the system problem. Okay, if you have an expensive machine that can help you to complete your work, but if you do not use the machine wisely, it will be the same. The system problem, costly in your organization or your company. And last but not least, the last part in the type of barriers or problem in solving office problem is the economic problem. So for example, this one is high energy costs, money, time, low productivity, theft of company property, and also the low office budget. Okay, so we have completed this one, so we are going to recap back what we have learned in chapter 4. Okay, so in chapter 4, actually I'm going to recap back what we have learned. Okay, so basically in chapter 4 there are 4 main contents. Okay, you need to know that administrative office manager is a problem solver, and then problem solving and productivity. And the third one is problem solving process. So under problem solving process, you need to know that you have 4, which is you need to know the problem solving environment, the basic elements of the problem itself, the problem solving process, the problem solving what we call abilities, and also the steps in solving problems. And lastly is the barriers. Only 3 types of barriers in solving the problem. Okay, so that's it in chapter 4. I hope you can understand and relate to the office situation, okay, for this subject. Okay, So for our references, we are referring to our first reference is by Quibble, and our second reference is the Collis and Keeling. Okay, that's it now for chapter 4. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum.